Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Law 1410, Contract Law 1 with Shivanjali Ramutar. Today, we'll delve into the third element which is necessary for a valid and legally enforceable contract, and that is consideration, having looked at offer and acceptance in detail in last week's synchronous lecture. Now, if you'd permit me to share my screen, you'll be able to see my PowerPoint presentation. As is usual, of course, you will be able to interact with the presentation via my learning platform after this lecture, so don't be dismayed. Now, I know it's after lunch and we may have had a lull, so let's start with a short video from YouTube taken from the TV show Suits to help us redirect our minds into this session.
Why did you ask me what exactly was written on the napkin?
No matter what it was written on, for a contract to be valid, it needs to have three things: an offer, acceptance,
And consideration.
what's consideration? Quid pro quo. You both get something.
Like I get his chips and he gets my company. That is a valid
Contract, yes.
You forgot one thing: competence. My client was drunk and you knew it.
You have proof of that? How many drinks did he have?
I don't remember.
That's a good start.
Well, here's what's going to happen. We're going to give you your money back and throw in the 500,000 you would have gotten had Keith won. And then we're never going to hear from you again.
Sorry. My advisors tell me that company's worth $30 million and I'm keeping it.
Well, when you show up to open the door with your napkin, it's not going to fit in the lock.
So if he wants to take your company, he's going to have to do it in court.
And then you'll be playing at my table.
All right. So Suits did really get it right in this instance. Harvey was right. In order for there to be a valid and legally enforceable contract, there must be three elements: offer, acceptance, and consideration. As budding lawyers, you know that contract law is essential to legal practice. And without these elements, Harvey from the video clip cannot be so confident about going to court now, can he? A court will not find it to be a valid contract or an enforceable one if there's no offer, acceptance, or consideration for the performance of that contract. Now, to ensure that we are on the same page, one moment.
Why did you?
How about we have a quick pop quiz? You can scan the QR code or type the link into the space bar and it'll take you to Mentimeter, where you can participate by sharing one key concept or principle which you recall from our offer and acceptance lecture. I'll just give you a moment to do so. All right, let's see what we have. We've got communication. Yes, the offer must be communicated and so must the acceptance. The objective test, as seen here, is used to determine any disputes. So we look to the reasonable man on the green band maxi and ask, what will that person find if he was presented with this factual scenario? Would he find an offer? Would he find an acceptance? You also need consensus at item. You need the meeting of the minds as to who is being made this offer and what is being offered. Well, there'll be no contract. We also have invitation to treat. An invitation to treat does not amount to an offer. So, for example, an advertisement or going window shopping or looking at items in a window is but an invitation to come into the store and treat with the item. When you take it to the cashier and ring it up, that's when you really enter into a contractual arrangement. What about counteroffer? Counteroffers are a key negotiation tactic. They are really rejections of the original offer where you're really putting something different on the table. That brings me to the next concept of the mirror image rule. Now, acceptance must mirror offer. If you are offered an item for sale for $50 and you produce 50 cents and say, I'll buy it for 50 cents, the acceptance does not mirror the offer and cannot amount to a valid contract. So if we don't have these elements, you can't have certainty of contract. So offer and acceptance and the rules which govern offer and acceptance ensure certainty of contract. And now we're moving on to consideration, which further lends to certainty of contract. So based on these responses, I'm really, really happy because it tells me that you've at least gotten the gist of the topic. So let's move on. By the end of this topic, I'm hoping that you'll be able to identify what is consideration. You'll be able to discuss the rationale for consideration in a contract, and you'll be able to discuss the rules governing consideration. Certainly, this class will facilitate you in being able to do these things. Now, let's jump right in. What is consideration? Consideration was described in the video short as quid pro quo, a this for a that, an exchange of some sort. Basically, one person is getting something while the other is giving something or giving something up. It's really a give and take. So if I give you $50 to spend on an hour of work, you've given up your time, which you could be spending on something else, and I've given up my money, which I could have spent on something else in order to give it to you. So we've both given up something, and this is an example of consideration. Dr. Afonso describes consideration as anything of value exchanged for obtaining a good service or benefit. Justice Lush in Curiam Misa explains that a valuable consideration in the sense of the law may consist either in some right or some interest or profit or benefit accruing to one party or some forbearance, detriment, loss or responsibility given, suffered or undertaken by the other. So we can really see here that give and that take. Moving on to the rationale. Now, I've mentioned this to you all before. Treaty on contracts is a practitioner's text with which you'll need to familiarize yourselves, as it'll certainly be integral to your legal practice. I've asked the librarian to ensure that there are copies available for you and for your use in the library. So feel free to make use of that, okay? Now, Chitty says, consideration requires something of value in the eyes of the law. It must be given for a promise in order to make it enforceable as a contract. And that segues straight into these three concepts or these three rationales for consideration. Consideration differentiates enforceable contracts from mere promises or gifts because a contract involves mutual obligations, whereas a gift is just one-sided transfer of value without an exchange. Consideration shows that both parties are serious about their agreement, and it shows that agreements are intentional and meaningful, providing a legal foundation for enforcement. Let's move right along, shall we, to the rules governing consideration. But let me pause for a cause. Do you all follow? And do you all have any questions? If you have any questions, please feel free to stop me at any point in time and we'll address it so that you can continue with clarity with our presentation. Okay, no questions. So moving right along. Consideration must move from the promisee. But I must have missed this part. The rules governing the doctrine of consideration involve 1. Consideration must move from the promisee. 2. Consideration need not be adequate, but it certainly must be sufficient. 3. Past consideration is no consideration. So now that we've seen these three rules that we're going to address, let's delve into it. Consideration must move from the promisee, not from a third party. Only he who paid the price for a promise could sue on that promise. It's not sufficient for a party to show that some other person has provided consideration. So if I agree with you to purchase your pen for $50, I'll pay you, and you fail to deliver the pen, then I can sue you for breach of contract. But if I purchase your pen and tell you to deliver it to A, you take my money and don't deliver the pen to A cannot sue you since consideration did not move from A. And that was the case in Price and Easton. D promised X that if X did certain work for him, he'd pay a sum of money to P. X did the work and P did not pay the money. The court held that P could not sue D because P could not show any consideration for the promise moving between P and D. Are we following? Lovely. Not getting any no's. So I'm throwing it out to you all. You know we have our forum on the My Learning platform where you can give me your muddiest point from today's session. Feel free to go on and set your muddiest point there and we'll deal with it at the next lecture or before that lecture, depending on the urgency of that concern. Okay, moving on to consideration. Must be sufficient, but need not be adequate. What do I mean by that? A promise cannot be enforced unless the promisee has given something of value for it. Whether the value consists of a benefit to the promiser or a detriment to the promisee, that's one thing, but the court will not question whether it's adequate or fair value was given. In the absence of fraud or undue influence, the court will not interfere with a bargain that's struck by the parties. And it's no defense to an action on the contract for the promiser to say, well, consideration was provided, but it was too small. It was inadequate. Not at all. Lord Somerville says a contracting party can stipulate for what consideration he chooses. Why? Because there's freedom of contract. The court will not interfere just because it seems like a party made a bad bargain, right? The person may very well have undisclosed reasons for accepting consideration that seems to you and I to be inadequate. Look, just as an example, in this photograph, the butcher is exchanging meat with the fisherman for fish. One may be tired of eating meat, the other may be tired of eating fish. We don't know, but to them, that's a good bargain. Moving right along to past consideration unless there are any questions. And there are none. So past consideration is not good consideration. The consideration for promise must be given in return for that promise. So if C offers to drive D to Maracas in C's car, on arrival at Maracas, D promises to pay $500 to C for his trouble and expense. D's promise is not binding on him because the consideration provided by C, that is the act of driving D to Maracas, is past. It occurred before D made his promise, so that's not enforceable. The same thing happened in Roscoe and Thomas. T bought used horse for $3,000, and after the sale, you promised T that the horse was sound and free from vice. But the horse turned out to be vicious, restive, ungovernable, and ferocious. It was held that there was no consideration to support T's promise, and he was not liable. The sale itself could not be used as valuable consideration because it had been completed by the time the promise was given. This particular statement could not be enforced. A consideration passed and executed will support no other promise. Lovely. So let's summarize, shall we? Consideration is anything of value exchanged for obtaining good, service, or benefit. We've got a rationale for consideration and ensures mutual exchange of value, distinguishes enforceable contracts from gifts, demonstrates commitment, and establishes legal enforceability of the agreement. And we looked at 3 core principles. Consideration must move from promisee. It must be sufficient but does not need to be adequate. And past consideration is generally not good consideration. So that being said, let me stop sharing my screen and let's engage in a poll now, shall we? All right, let's see what you guys have. Lovely. So, first question, what is consideration in contract law? You got it right. It's something of value exchange between the parties. And which of the following is an example of sufficient consideration? Right again, payment of money for services rendered. Excellent. I'm really happy with the responses. And there is an exercise in our My Learning forum for you to engage in with a particular fact scenario. I look forward to getting your feedback on that fact scenario, which deals with this very topic, considerations. Until next time, folks, take care.